21, Acts chapter 21. That's where we're starting. Last time we managed to cover the whole of Acts chapter 20. We might be able to get through all of 21 now. Let's see. So just to review, last time, Paul completed his third missionary journey, and this title, these titles of these missionary journeys is not from the Bible itself. It's something that's come to be attached to the three missionary journeys. And pretty much any Bible you look in, if you look in the back, if it has a map section, it's going to have maps of the first, second, and third missionary journey, which are described through Acts, which we read. So this is Paul's third missionary journey. He ends up coming back this way. Now, remember, he had hoped to go make it to Jerusalem for the Passover, but he misses that as he comes back around this way. And he's hoping to make it in time for Pentecost, which is 50 days later. So we left him last time at the end of Acts 20. He was making his way down the coast of what is today the west coast of modern day Turkey, or Asia Minor. And just a reminder here. So, and we've gotten back in the beginning of Acts chapter 20 into this we section where it seems that St. Luke himself has rejoined Paul, probably picking up with him in Philippi up here. And so we have a lot more travel details. But to remember, in the ancient world at this time, there weren't regular passenger boats per se. So instead, what would happen, and there certainly wasn't any kind of regular schedule, like, every Thursday, at 10 o'clock, there's a boat traveling from west to east, and every, Monday traveling from east to west, etc. Instead, they were mainly, there was lots of trade going on in the Mediterranean here. And mostly these were small boats. And because they were small boats, they tended to hug the coast. And then they would stop in at each port. And, it wasn't nearly as organized as we would imagine in our day. So, they would stop into a port and then they would see what business there was. They would take on contracts for cargo. A lot of times the owners of the boats were remote owners, and they hired a captain of the ship. And so the captain of the ship, the owner may arrange for pickups and drop-offs of this cargo. But then the captain, when he would stop in port while he was dropping off cargo and taking on more cargo, he might, while he's there, be open to someone coming up to him and saying, "Hey, I'm looking for a ride east. Where are you going?" And then that person would offer him some money to hop on board. It wasn't a passenger ship, and the passenger would have to provide his own sleeping material, his own food with him, etc. But the captain would let him get on board and go with them to whatever the next port was in exchange for some money, which would be off the books. And so that would be the captain himself could keep that money. So it was a very unofficial way of traveling. I mean, almost think of it like hitchhiking. So keep that in mind as we hear about these travel details. They may seem strange to us, but they're kind of just going with the flow and seeing what boat they can get going where and how quickly they can get there. And it's all depending on the weather. If there's a bad storm, if the seas aren't navigable, then everything will stop and everyone will just have to wait where they are. So that's the ancient world. And still it's sort of kind of an old world mentality. Whereas we in the new world, we want to be masters over nature, and we plan everything. We're going this time, and we're going to be there at this time, and we're going to come back at this time, and we think we're in control. But in the ancient world, it was more, I hope to get there if God wills, like it says in James. All right. So when we last left Paul at the end of chapter 20, he was saying goodbye to the elders the elders of Ephesus, but in Miletus. So he's stopping right here. All right. Now it came to pass, we're on chapter 21, verse 1. Now it came to pass that when we had departed from them, the elders at Miletus, and set sail, running a straight course, we came to Kos, the following day to Rhodes, and from there to Patara. All right, so Kos, the island of Kos, which today is part of Greece. Then they go to Rhodes again. And when they say Rhodes, Rhodes is also the name of the main town of the island of Rhodes. So they stop in at the port there. So they're making their way just like a small cargo ship would at that time, stopping at each of these ports, dropping off, taking on cargo, and then to Patara here. All right. Now it's going to say that they made a straight course, and they came across here. So probably at Patara, for a ship to make this straight shot right through the center of the Mediterranean means that this was probably a large cargo ship. Otherwise, it would probably keep hugging the coast. So this was probably a larger ship, and they were probably happy to find. We don't know exactly where they caught this ship, in Miletus or in Patara or where, but they were probably happy to catch the ship because St. John Chrysostom says that this trip would take 5 days. So instead of, it would take much longer if they had to take a ship and go all the way around like this. So it'll become important in a second. So it's probably a larger ship. This is a more dangerous route, but by this time, as we're approaching Pentecost, it's probably May, and I think the year is about 58. So by May, the seas are better. The winter, it's dangerous. And you notice here, they're going to pass Cyprus to the left. All right, verse 2. Okay, yeah. So here he does say that in Patara, that's where they find this large ship. And finding a ship sailing over to Phoenicia. Now, Phoenicia means modern day Lebanon, and Phoenicia is where we get the word Palestinians. Palestine actually is a corruption eventually from the word for Phoenicia. And the Phoenicians are this. Yeah.
Excuse me, I don't mean.
Oh, sorry, Philistines.
Philistines, yes,
Yeah.
Philistines. That's correct.
Sorry. Yes. And so here you have the Phoenicians. The Phoenicians were an ancient civilization. And so you hear Tyre and Sidon were two capital cities of Phoenicia. But the Phoenicians were great traders that established colonies all over the Mediterranean, even as far as Carthage over here in North Africa. But eventually their power dwindled. All right. So sailing over to Phoenicia, we went aboard and set sail. When we had sighted Cyprus, we passed it on the left, sailed to Syria, and landed at Tyre, for there the ship was to unload her cargo. All right, so here they land here at Tyre, which, is mentioned. Tyre and Sidon is mentioned in the Old Testament. Jesus mentions it. So Tyre and Sidon is in this area of Phoenicia, and then here you have Jerusalem down here.
Father, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Is Tyre where the Syrophoenician woman came and begged for her daughter, and he said, "I came for the children of Israel," and she said, "Even the dogs eat from their master's table"?
Yeah.
So because the Lebanese people claim that Jesus actually walked on their land and healed in their land.
I believe that's,
and so
I know I have to look that up, but I believe that's true. And Tyre,
yeah,
interestingly, an ancient Tyre is a very ancient city, and it was a wall. It was actually an island just off the coast. Originally, it was an island, and then it was fortified with these huge walls. It was considered an unconquerable city until Alexander the Great conquered it. And Alexander the Great actually had his soldiers, when he came, he had his soldiers just spend, and he pressed into labor the locals, and they just brought these huge rocks and basically just kept moving these huge rocks and built a bridge to connect the land. And then he laid siege to Tyre and finally took it. But it was one of the most powerful cities in the world before Alexander the Great. All right. Let's see here. So, verse 4, and finding disciples, we stayed there 7 days. So what does he mean? He means in Tyre. So they're in Tyre, and finding disciples, we stayed there 7 days. So what does he mean? So one, it seems a little odd to us that Paul's in this big hurry to get to Jerusalem for the Feast of Pentecost. So why does he hang out for 7 days in Tyre? Well, probably because they found this ship that was taking the straight course across the Mediterranean, and gets them closer to their destination. And they're so happy to find that ship that saved them a lot of days. And now they're waiting for another ship that's going to take them south further, but they can afford, because they save so much time with the big cargo ship crossing directly over the Mediterranean, they can afford these extra days to wait for another ship to take them further south, closer to Jerusalem. And so it happens that while they're staying there waiting for another ship, or waiting perhaps for this ship to continue further south, they find disciples there. And then this is another kind of curiosity. How on earth are there disciples in Tyre? Well, we don't know exactly how they got there, but by this point it's been 20 years at least since the day of Pentecost, the Christian day of Pentecost. um, and we know that after the persecution of Stephen and his martyrdom, that the Hellenistic Jewish Christians fled from Jerusalem. So it's not unreasonable that some of them ended up in places like Tyre. We also know that the other apostles, this Acts has been following the story of Peter mainly, and now for the last half of Acts, Paul. But it doesn't mean that the rest of the apostles were just twiddling their thumbs. They're all busy as well. But Acts has chosen to follow the story of Paul. So it's interesting that they find that there are these disciples there who have there's a Christian community there that's come to be independent of Paul, it seems. So they find fellow Christians and they stay there 7 days. They told Paul through the Spirit not to go up to Jerusalem. So again, we have this prophecy through the Spirit warning Paul about Jerusalem. Verse 5, when we had come to the end of those days, we departed and went on our way. And they all accompanied us with wives and children till we were out of the city. And we knelt down on the shore and prayed. When we had taken our leave of one another, we boarded the ship and they returned home. So, this is a lovely picture of Christian hospitality, that these Christians in Tyre who have never met Paul or Luke or their companions, yet they're family by association. So it's kind of like when Greek Orthodox are traveling and they they run into other Greeks or Greek Orthodox in another city. It's a small world. You're connected by your faith. So the same beautiful thing happens there. These people, the Christians in Tyre, open up their homes to Paul and Luke and his traveling companions. And in just 7 days, they have this close bond. They're probably thrilled to have Paul there who can teach them. And so after just 7 days, they're already this close that these people accompany them, their whole families accompanying these travelers down to the shore where they're going to catch the boat, take them a little bit further south, closer to Jerusalem. And they pray with them for safe travels, you would imagine. And then they board the ship and they returned home. As Luke is saying, in other words, that the Christians from Tyre didn't come with them, but they returned to their home in Tyre.
Father, I have a question, please. What am I trying to remember kind of sinfulness in Tyre and Sidon? I remember something about that.
Yeah, it's from the Old Testament. There was a judgment on Tyre and Sidon, but it was Tyre and Sidon was part of Phoenicia, really. Yeah, I can't remember the details from the Old Testament about what the judgment was on Tyre and Sidon, but you're thinking of Jesus saying it'll be worse for Jesus's kind of warning that it'll be worse for you in those days than it was in Tyre and Sidon. In other words, he's warning about this kind of judgment of God.
Right.
But I can't remember the details from the Old Testament. All right, verse 7. And when we had finished our voyage from Tyre, we came to Ptolemais, greeted the brethren, and stayed with them one day. So again, the boat they find heading south gets them to Ptolemais, today known as the city of Akko here. So They're just trying to get as close as they can down to Jerusalem. So they managed to find a city that takes them this one stop, and they stay. And again, they find Christian disciples in that city. They stay with them for the night, presumably while they wait for another boat or the same boat to continue its journey south. All right. On the next day, verse 8, on the next day, we who were Paul's companions departed and came to Caesarea and entered the house of Philip the evangelist, who was one of the 7, and stayed with him. Now, we don't know exactly, if he took the boat or if they went by land. We kind of assume they went by boat to Caesarea Maritima. So Caesarea, now, and it says Philip the evangelist. So now we got to remember back to Acts chapter 8. So the first part of the story, Acts chapter 8, what happens? Philip the evangelist. Philip in chapter 6 is ordained one of the 7 original deacons of the church. And then he goes to Samaria, and he preaches in Samaria and converts some Samaritans there. Peter comes and confirms them. And then Philip, by a vision, sees the Ethiopian eunuch. He travels on the road with him in his chariot. He explains the Old Testament to him. He baptizes the Ethiopian eunuch. And then, and that was on the road to Gaza. And then he travels up to Caesarea Maritima, where I think it's in Acts 8:20, the story leaves him there. Now, we're 13 chapters later, and we come back to him. He's stayed in that city, and that was 20 years has passed now. So let's see. So what did it say? They came to Caesarea and entered the house of Philip the evangelist, who was one of the 7, and stayed with him. So now there are Christians here as well. 9. Now this man, meaning Philip the evangelist, the deacon, now this man had 4 virgin daughters who prophesied. And as we stayed many days, a certain prophet named Agabus came down from Judea. Now we should remember Agabus also he was a prophet. He's a prophet from Judea who came to Antioch originally and predicted the famine that was going to occur in the days of Claudius. So now here he reappears in this prophetic role. 11. When he had come to us, he took Paul's belt, bound his own hands and feet, and said, "Thus says the Holy Spirit, so shall the Jews at Jerusalem bind the man who owns this belt and deliver him into the hands of the Gentiles." So this is a prophetic action. So this is very much in the mold of the prophets from the Old Testament, where they prophesied often in symbolic actions. Sometimes without words, but often with words accompanying and explaining the actions. So here he's showing, by doing this, he takes Paul's belt and he says that he's prophesying in the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit has directed him, like the prophets of old, to do this. Takes Paul's belt, he binds his own hands and feet, and he predicts again that disaster will befall Paul if he goes to Jerusalem. So we keep hearing these warnings about the Holy Spirit prophesying that trouble was waiting for Paul in Jerusalem. But at the same time, we learn that Paul was being directed, and in his mind, that he was being directed by the Holy Spirit to go to Jerusalem. So we think, well, is the Holy Spirit contradicting itself? No, not necessarily. Paul says that he's willing to die for the name of Jesus. He's not interested in his own life. So in his mind, the Holy Spirit could be directing him, you must go to Jerusalem, just like Jesus set his face toward Jerusalem, where he would go to die and where he knew he was going to die. So Paul also has his face set to Jerusalem. The Holy Spirit is compelling him to go there. And the Spirit is telling these other Christian disciples that it's going to be bad for Paul in Jerusalem, that trouble is going to befall him there, and that they wish that he wouldn't go. But it doesn't mean that the Holy Spirit's contradicting it. Paul says, all I know is that I'm supposed to go to Jerusalem. They're saying bad things are going to happen. And he says, that may be, but I'm still going. All right. So then 12. Now, when we heard these things, both we and those from that place pleaded with him not to go up to Jerusalem. So even his own companions, like Luke, after they keep hearing these prophecies from these Christians at their meetings, warning them, don't go, don't go. Even they say to Paul, Paul, maybe we should turn back. Maybe we should stay here instead. 13, then Paul answered, what do you mean by weeping and breaking my heart? For I am ready not only to be bound, but also to die at Jerusalem for the name of the Lord Jesus. So in other words, why are you pleading with me and breaking my own heart, making this difficult for me? This is what I must do. So 14, so when he would not be persuaded, we ceased, saying, the will of the Lord be done. All right, 15. Now remember, at this point, this is happening in Caesarea Maritima here, which was the seat of the Roman governor of, in this case, in the time of Jesus, Pontius Pilate. All right, verse 15. And after those days, we packed up and went up to Jerusalem. So it seems that although theoretically they could have maybe gotten a little bit closer by sea, at this point they decided, all right, we're close enough. We're going to walk now to Jerusalem, or ride, as the case may be here. 16, and also some of the disciples from Caesarea went with us and brought with them a certain Mnason of Cyprus, an early disciple with whom we were to lodge. All right, so this is an early disciple. Now, there's a lot of speculation. When we look at Acts, scholars are really interested. Luke tells us in the beginning of the Gospel of Luke that he has done all this research. He's compiled all these sources, written, oral, etc. Luke is a historian. And so you can see here hints of who were Luke's sources. So when he identifies Mnason of Cyprus as an early disciple, you can, and that they're traveling together, you can bet that Luke is soaking up information from him as they're traveling together. This is where yet another one of his sources where he gets all his information for the Gospel of Luke and for Acts. And this with whom we were to lodge, it's not clear whether that means that it probably means that Mnason either had a house in Jerusalem or knew people in Jerusalem with whom they could lodge. Some people say that maybe there was some village in between Caesarea and Jerusalem where he had a house. We're not exactly sure. But probably he knows these people in Jerusalem with whom they can lodge. Now remember, this is one of the feasts, one of the three major feasts. Passover, Pentecost, this one, and then Tabernacles in the fall are the three major feasts, pilgrimage feasts, that all able-bodied Jewish men should try to attend. So it's important that they know somebody who can get them lodging in Jerusalem now during this period, because it's going to be very crowded.
Can you imagine, Father, by the thousands that flocked to Jerusalem and where they would have find lodging? And even in as far as when I was a child, a lot of people who would come from other parts, they came from Sudan, from Alexandria, from Cyprus, especially for Holy Week, where these people, all of them, and many were poor, where they would lodge. And the cities, the many families in Jerusalem that had houses within the old city would actually rent rooms to these lodgers, and they were I know certain families that used to do that, especially from Ramallah, that lived in Jerusalem. And so it was very interesting to see that concept from those days back when, and up till now, when the pilgrims come and people who can't afford hotels and so on, that they would find lodging with, let's say, through the Coptic mission or through the Greek Orthodox mission. And the church up till now provides bread to all of these people. They had ovens and bakeries. I know a certain person that used to bake for them. And he used to tell me, we used to bake bread from the Greek Orthodox Patriarchate and give to people there.
All right, so it says here, verse 17, And when we had come to Jerusalem. So now remember, by this point, Paul's traveling group is growing larger. As he concluded his third missionary journey and has made his way from Greece all the way back to the Holy Land now, he's taken with him representatives from all these communities, from Corinth, perhaps from Thessaloniki, from Philippi, and now even from Caesarea, and they're all going to this Jewish feast of Pentecost together. Now, this is reminds me that, this whole issue, which is about to come up now in the chapter, is what is the Christian's relationship at this time with Judaism? And that part of the problem is that our understanding has been colored by 2,000 years of history, and specifically the Protestant Reformation. So, when we get to the 1500s, maybe one of the principles of the Protestant Reformation is this faith versus works. And they start to see the Catholic Church as inheriting this kind of works righteousness from Judaism, where it was so important to your salvation of what you did, etc., feast days, etc. And they wanted to throw this off as part of their criticism of the Catholics, and so they tended to really emphasize. We're talking about the Protestant reformers in the 1500s. Their view, they really loved Paul, especially. But their view of Paul was of Paul as the anti-Jew, right? So this idea developed that I think probably were informed by all the Protestant cultures in particular are informed by, of Paul being anti-Jewish, that he had accepted Christ, he had been baptized, and all the Christians at this time, once they were baptized, they just threw off their Jewish roots. And that's sort of the dominant kind of worldview perspective that we bring to the Bible. The only problem with this is that it's not true. So there's no evidence for this. It's much more nuanced than that. So what we're going to see here is, when we look at Acts as a whole, there's no evidence whatsoever that Paul has thrown off the Jews. I remember we talked before where Paul gets so frustrated with the Jews in the synagogue, and he says, from now I shake the dust off my feet. From now on, I'm going to the Gentiles. That's by the Protestant reformers. The Protestant reformers really looked at that phrase as, okay, Paul's done with Judaism. This is when Christianity is now something totally different, and they're aiming only at the Gentiles. They're taking with them no part of Judaism, the Mosaic Law, etc. But then what did we see in the very next scene? He goes to a new town. What's he do? Goes straight to the synagogue. So it's something to keep in mind here that he's taking with him all these Christians, and what's he doing? They're going through all of this trouble to go to Jerusalem for one of the Jewish pilgrimage feasts, right? Now, and we're going to see that he goes to the temple once he gets to Jerusalem. So there's no evidence that he's thrown off Judaism. Now, at this point, at this Pentecost, we're maybe about 20 years after the Christian Pentecost. So is there any doubt that the Christians in Jerusalem are going to come together on that day and celebrate the anniversary of the coming of the Holy Spirit upon them and the speaking in tongues? Of course the Christians are going to do that. Just as they still seem to go to the synagogues on Saturday, and then they meet on Sunday for their Christian worship of celebrating the Eucharist. The same thing here. They're going to go to participate in the Pentecost Jewish temple services, and then they're also going to celebrate its fulfillment in the actual Christian day of Pentecost. So the Jewish feast of Pentecost is celebrating the giving of the law to Moses. The Christian feast is a celebration of the giving of the Holy Spirit, writing the law in their hearts, as Jeremiah might have said. So they're celebrating both things. That's why they're going to Jerusalem. That's why they're going to end up going to the temple. So I just, we need to I need to mention that, because we have to almost consciously deprogram ourselves from thinking this way. So
what about this James, Father, this verse 18? I hate to interrupt, but this James that we're looking at in the next verse, is that James, the brother of the Lord?
Yes, James, the brother of the Lord, the one who back in chapter 15 presided over the first council in Jerusalem, about how to receive the Gentiles, the first bishop of Jerusalem. So 18, on the following day, Paul went in with us to James, and all the elders were present. Elders here is the Greek word presbyters, where we get priests from. So, and all the presbyters were present. So in other words, you almost get the sense that there was a message had gone out before Paul. A messenger had gone ahead to Jerusalem and said, Paul's coming. This group of Christians from the diaspora is coming, and that they called a special kind of assembly or meeting. 19. So, you in a Christian sense, and you can almost sense it in the way Luke writes, like Luke's traveling with a rock star here. He's traveling with Paul, and now Paul's opening all these doors, and now that they're going to go meet with James and all the elders, all the early disciples. So they come in, and Luke is just kind of tagging along and taking notes about, he realizes that there's the historic nature of what he's participating in. 19, when he had greeted them, he told in detail those things which God had done among the Gentiles through his ministry. He'd been working for several years now. And here's an interesting thing too, is that based on Paul's letters, we have no doubt whatsoever that this journey in Paul's mind was connected with his collection. So he was collecting money from all of these churches that he founded in Greece, especially, and bringing it to relieve the poor in Jerusalem. And so that it would have been at this meeting where he would have presented the collection. And that's why he brought representatives from all those communities with him as well. They were to attend the pilgrimage, but they also wanted to present this collection to James and the church in Jerusalem to show their solidarity with Judaism, to show that there wasn't any rupture between them. Now it's caused endless speculation. Why doesn't Luke mention the collection? Luke doesn't say anything about the collection, but we know from Paul's letters that in Paul's mind, this was an important part of this travel back to Jerusalem. We don't know, but it's almost certain that he's presenting the collection at this point too, and he's giving a report of the work that's being done in the diaspora. So they go through these things. Verse 20. And when they heard it, in other words, James and the presbyters, the elders in Jerusalem, when they heard all that Paul had been doing in his missionary journeys, they glorified the Lord. And they said to him, you see, brother, how many myriads of Jews there are who have believed, and they are all zealous for the law. But they have been informed about you that you teach all the Jews who are among the Gentiles to forsake Moses, saying that they ought not to circumcise their children, nor to walk according to the customs. All right, so what's he saying? So James and the elders in Jerusalem are rejoicing about Paul's success, but they're kind of forced to report to him that there is a segment that is highly suspicious of his activities, which we've seen this the reaction by a segment of the Jews in the synagogues from all the cities he visited, that they interpret him as rejecting the law, rejecting the customs of the Jewish people. Now, undoubtedly, these, remember, especially all those Jews of these diaspora cities throughout the Mediterranean, they're trying also to make it to one of these 3 pilgrimage feasts per year. And Paul's been gone several years now. So there's no doubt that over the course of the years, that some of those Jews who attacked Paul, who are ticked off with Paul, ended up going on a pilgrimage to Jerusalem for one of the feasts, and that the rumors got around in Jerusalem about this Paul character and what they perceived him to be doing. So James and the elders have heard about this, and they've put two together. They know that it's Paul, and they're forced to report to Paul what they've heard, but it's kind of clear from their tone, although this is debatable, but it's clear from their tone that they know the rumors are false, but that there's this false perception, there's this misunderstanding about what Paul's doing. In other words, what he's being accused of is not only telling the Gentiles that they can become Christ followers, they can become Jewish Christ followers without circumcision, without following all of the Mosaic law, like the dietary restrictions, that, they may have problems with that or not, but they're going so far as to say that he's telling not just those Gentiles who were interested in Judaism, he's telling the Jews themselves that they don't need to circumcise anymore, that they can cast off the law. And this falls into this kind of the reading of the early Protestant reformers in the 1500s, that this was in fact what Paul was saying. But it seems here from the context that they're reporting this is the misperception that some Jews have about you and the false rumor that they're spreading. All right, 22. What then? The assembly must, well, now let's see here. What's the Greek word? 22. 21. Okay. All right, so I'm just looking for what the Greek word is. I don't see it. What then? Lilithas. What then? The assembly must certainly meet, for they will hear that you have come. The assembly, the reason I'm looking for the Greek word is I assume it's ecclesia, the church. The assembly of the believers, of Christians, must certainly meet, for they will hear that you have come into Jerusalem. Therefore, do what we tell you. We have 4 men who have taken a vow. So in other words, because this misperception about you exists, and now you've come back into town, and people are going to have heard that you're in town, and people are going to be looking to see what you do, how you relate with us, how we treat you, etc. In order to dispel this false rumor that they're spreading against you, here's what you can do. We have 4 men who have taken a vow, meaning have taken a Nazarite vow. So these are obviously Jewish Christians who have taken a Nazarite vow, who in other words are still following the Mosaic law, despite the fact they've been baptized and become Christians. They're still Jews also. They've taken this Nazarite vow, which remember Luke reported that Paul took one in Corinth as well. He fulfilled this vow. So the Nazarite vow was that they would, St. John the Baptist, for instance, was famous for having this Nazarite vow. Samson in the Old Testament had a Nazarite vow. Even though he broke all the vows he made, he nevertheless supposedly had a Nazarite vow. And then the Nazarite vow you took for a period of time. It could be indefinite, it could be forever, but usually for a period of time, you pledged purity, basically, a period of more strict holiness. So you stayed away from touching a corpse, you remained chaste, you avoided alcohol, and then also, and here's where the details differ a little bit. It seems like maybe there was a different customs in the diaspora maybe, but it involved cutting your hair also. So some say that the cutting of the hair happened at the beginning, some say it happened at the end, maybe both, but in any event, that you would cut the hair, and the hair would then be burned as a sacrifice at the temple, usually when you came to either when you came to declare the vow, or when you came to fulfill the vow at the end. They would cut their hair and they would burn it at the altar. Now this is where we get the
baptism for when we baptize a child, we cut hair.
Cutting the hair, it's part of a vow, this Nazarite vow to holiness. Now in this case, usually from what we can tell about Jewish practice at this time, that if there wasn't so you would go to the temple and you would declare there your intention to take this vow and the period for which you would take it. And the kind of default period, if nothing else was mentioned, was 30 days, that you're going to take this vow for 30 days. Now you think about too, how this runs into our practice of, Lent, for example, this period where we take almost this kind of vow to a higher standard of holiness, purity, of being separated as part of a religious kind of vow or obligation to grow closer to God. So there's this continuity. It's also the forerunner of the monastic movement. So those who, like St. John the Baptist, or kept this vow forever, become the forerunners for monastics in our tradition. So they said, look, we have four of our own Jewish Christians who have taken a Nazirite vow. Take them and be purified with them. In other words, take them now to the temple here in Jerusalem. Be purified with them. Why? Because Paul now has been traveling for several years outside of the Holy Land. And the custom was that when you returned to the Holy Land from Gentile foreign lands, that you would, remember, shake the dust from your feet because it was considered impure, and so there was actually a ritual process of to restore purity when you came back from Gentile lands, especially for as long as Paul had stayed away. This would probably involve a mikvah bath, a ritual bath, etc. But anyway, so he's saying, take them and be purified with them. So now they're entering a Nazirite vow, which they're going to say do for 30 days. For pilgrims like Paul, they had to fulfill a 7-day period of purification. So he's saying, go with them to the temple. They're going to start their 30-day period. You will start that way your 7-day period of being purified from returning from the Gentile lands. And pay their expenses so that they may shave their heads, and that all may know that those things of which they were informed concerning you are nothing, but that you yourself also walk orderly and keep the law, that you have not abandoned the law, that you still follow the traditions of our fathers, the Jewish traditions, etc. So, the early Protestant reformers would tend to read these passages very selectively. They would read the parts that made it seem like Paul was against the law and just ignore those parts where it says, you walk orderly and keep the law. So, in other words, go with them. Now, and this is interesting. It was a custom, we know at that time, that if someone was going to take this vow of purity, they were going to make this, think of it in our terms as, they're going to undertake Lent, a very strict Lent. And this is actually how our Lent started, was that Lent was really the period for those who are about to be baptized, received into the church, that they would undertake this 40-day fast in order to prepare for their baptism. And those who are already Christians then started to do it with them in solidarity with them and to renew their own baptismal vows. But so here you have this idea that he's saying pay for them to do this. In other words, take up their expenses for whatever it costs to fulfill this vow. There may have been some fee that they paid to the priest, for example, to watch their to cut their hair and to burn their hair at the altar, etc. Take care of those things, and then in this way you participate in the good work that they're doing. So we know from the Jewish tradition of the time that it was considered a pious work to do this, to pay the expenses of someone who's going to take this vow. And we have this sense still, especially in Greece, where monasteries are just such a part of life. In Greece, which is, about the size of, let's say, Alabama, maybe a little bit bigger, you have 1,000 active monasteries in Greece. So everyone has a relationship with a monastery. Everyone has some relative, a distant relative who's a monk or a nun. And there's this considered in Greece too, there's a certain piety associated with supporting the monastery. So even though I myself might not live like a monk, I appreciate the work that the monk does to live a life of holiness and to spend a life in prayer for me and for the world. And I support that by bringing some of my eggs and produce from my garden, from my fields to the monastery to support the monastery. And this is considered a pious act. That's a blessing. So something similar here, but by supporting these people in their pious act economically, there's a blessing attached to it. So in other words, so James is saying, do this. So one, you'll go with them to be purified according to the Mosaic law. You're going to support them in their fulfilling of this Nazirite vow, again, Mosaic law. And this way you're going to show publicly, all these pilgrims now are gathered in the days approaching the Feast of Pentecost. And some of them have stayed over from Passover. The city is full of pilgrims, many of whom come from the diaspora, who've heard these rumors about you. Do this publicly. Go walk into the temple now publicly with these people so that they can all see you do this, and it will dispel the rumors. All right, 25. But concerning the Gentiles who believe, we have written and decided that they should observe no such thing, except that they should keep themselves from things offered to idols, from blood, from things strangled, and from sexual immorality. In other words, he's repeating here the decision that they made back in Acts 15 at the First Council of Jerusalem concerning Paul's ministry and what the Gentiles were obligated to keep. So we got to make this distinction that, and they're doing this by going to Leviticus, to the Holiness Code. And when God gave the law to Moses, he said, go and tell the sons of Israel X, Y, and Z. But in only a few cases does he say to God say to Moses, go and tell the sons of Israel and those foreigners dwelling in the land of Israel to do the following. And it's only these 4 things that are mentioned in Leviticus that apply also to the foreigners living amongst the sons of Israel. So keep themselves from things offered to idols, from blood, from things strangled, and from sexual immorality. So he's these 3 things rather. So he's or things offered to idols, from blood and things strangled. That's kind of combined into one, and from sexual immorality. So he's repeating what they already decided in Acts 15. So he's making a distinction. He's saying, you know, there's this misperception about you, this false rumors that you're telling even Jews by birth to do away, that they don't need to follow Mosaic law anymore. They don't need to circumcise, etc. We know that's false. So prove it by you yourself, who are born a Jew, keeping the law. And Paul doesn't object to this at all. But for the Gentiles who want to become Christ followers and therefore Jewish, again, we reiterate that the only that we've decided by the Holy Spirit that they only need to keep these 3 or 4 things. All right, verse 26. So Paul does it, no objection. Then Paul took them in, and the next day, having been purified with them, entered the temple to announce the expiration of the days of purification, at which time an offering should be made for each one of them. So in other words, this is a little confusing. So when it says, took them in and having been purified with them entered the temple, in other words, there was a ritual washing that happened before they entered into the temple. And they went to the temple to announce the expiration of the days of purification. In other words, to declare that whatever so we've entered here on this date, the 10th of the month. And so from this date, I will complete the 7 days of my purification on the 17th or the 16th or whatever it is. And these men taking their Nazirite vow will have vowed to complete X many days. And that will be concluded on such and such a date. But they announce it in the temple publicly as a way of making their vow known and public and official. Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
At which time, in other words, when this date comes that we've just announced that we're going to come back on this date, at that time, an offering should be made for each one of them. So in other words, when we come back, we will bring an offering. All right, 27. Now, when the 7 days were almost ended, in other words, Paul's 7 days of purification were almost ended, the Jews from Asia, and we're talking about Asia, we're talking about this province of Asia, which is Western Asia Minor, Western modern day Turkey. Now, so in Ephesus is the chief city here. Now, I didn't mention this, but Hierapolis here, actually, so Philip the evangelist, who had made his home here in Caesarea Maritima for 20 years and received Paul and his companions, his tomb and the tombs of at least 2 of his 4 daughters are actually located here in Hierapolis. So it seems that Philip, sometime after this point, Philip and his daughters and many Christians from this area relocated out of this area and went to the area around Ephesus. Probably we would assume maybe at the year 70 is when the temple was destroyed. And then we know that there were some crackdowns by the Romans on Jews in the area, persecution. So at some point after this time, 58, many of them end up going to Ephesus. Perhaps this is when John and the Virgin Mary end up going to Ephesus as well. We talked about that before.
Would you say about the year 58 is when John took the Holy Mother to Ephesus?
I don't know, but we know at some point after this, Philip and the daughters leave, and we know that during some of the revolts, like the revolt in 66, and then the destruction of the temple in 70, that the Romans had some crackdown. So at some point, probably over the next 10, 12 years, there was an exodus of Jews in general and specifically Christians. So it makes sense that at some point, that's when Philip and John and the Virgin Mary left.
And
for-
one more question, please. When did they ever allow the Jews to go back to Rome? We know that at one point we mentioned in the book of Acts that Aquila, no, was it Aquila and his wife, Priscilla, and they had left there because they had cast the Jews out of Rome. And I don't know what year that was exactly, but did they ever allow the Jews to go back to Rome at one
I think
point?
it was in 54 that the Emperor Claudius expelled the Jews. The Jews were often used as kind of scapegoats, which then the Christians would be used as scapegoats too. Yeah, they were allowed back a couple years later. I think when Claudius died, I think they were allowed back not long after. All right, so
Yeah.
so about a week passes, and the Jews from Asia. So those Jews from, now remember this area, this is Asia. So we're talking about the area around Ephesus. And remember, Paul had gone through this area a couple times. He had been here at Troas. You know, he had met the elders in Miletus, etc. So the Jews from this area, some of whom did not take kindly to Paul, and we can kind of assume Ephesus is probably the epicenter. Some of them had traveled from Ephesus in Asia Minor, just like Paul and his companions did, to Jerusalem for Passover or Pentecost at the time. They were there, and they see him in the temple. And so these ones who objected to him, who were part of the riot perhaps back in Ephesus, they see him there in Jerusalem in the temple, and they stirred up the whole crowd and laid hands on him. 28, crying out, "Men of Israel, help. This is the man who teaches all men everywhere against the people, the law, in this place." So again, this familiar refrain that the Christians are tearing down the law and this place, meaning the temple, the law and the temple, the law and the temple. Remember, that was the charge against Stephen as well, that he spoke against Moses and God, meaning the law and the temple. And furthermore, he also brought Greeks into the temple and has defiled this holy place. And then Luke adds an explanatory note here, for they had previously seen Trophimus the Ephesian with him in the city, whom they supposed that Paul had brought into the temple. So again, confirms our suspicions that these Jews from Asia are at least mainly Jews from Ephesus, where Paul had spent 2-3 years and stirred up a good deal of trouble. And they recognized Paul, and they recognized Trophimus, the Ephesian, a Gentile convert to Christianity. And they had seen during these 7 days that Paul had been in Jerusalem, they'd seen Paul and they'd seen Trophimus. And so they assumed, based on their already existing misperception of him and his attitude toward the law, that Paul had brought this Trophimus into the temple with him. Now, why was this so bad? So they're shouting this out and getting people all riled up. Why? So here's the temple here. So it was forbidden. This area here is called the courtyard of the Gentiles courtyard. So the Gentiles were only allowed in this space. They were not allowed any further. This is the courtyard of the women. And then you go into the priest courtyard here where the men, the Israelites courtyard you see here. And then only the priests could enter into the holy place. And then within this holy place, in the back of the holy place, was the Holy of Holies, just in this back half. And you see there was a curtain here that separated the front part of the holy place from the Holy of Holies. And then this area was for the men. All right. And there was another curtain here, actually. So this is when they talk about the curtain being torn. It's actually, there were 2 curtains. And so this plays with, there's an interpretation about the curtain being torn, meaning that this division has been this division has been rent between God and man, which is true. But sometimes people, Protestants typically will take this against the Catholics and the Orthodox in particular and say, well, therefore you shouldn't have an altar area, and iconostas is separating altar area because the curtain's been torn. Well, it's true that one of the curtains has been torn, but not both. There still is this idea of the holy place, of God's dwelling place. But anyway, all right. So what's he talking about here?
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Can I ask? So which curtain was torn? The one that covered the Holy of Holies, or the one with the entrance of that last area of the temple?
The Holy of Holies here.
Yeah, that's what I want to make sure, that it was the curtain that normally nobody would go in there except the high priest once a year. That's the one that tore from top to bottom.
Yes, so that God's presence back here was fully accessible to all the priests here in the first part of the
Yes.
Holy of Holies. But this curtain still exists. So when it
Mhm.
says that, we do believe that, as it says in First Peter, that the Christians are a royal priesthood, that all Christians now are priests, in the sense that there's no longer this Gentile area, there's no longer this women's courtyard area. All are priests, even women are here in this area. But there still is the special priesthood, the specific priesthood, which serves inside this area, right? So there still is this distinction between this area and this area. And that's what exists in the Orthodox Church today. All right, but that's often misrepresented, misunderstood. All right, so all right, when they're talking here, they're saying that this is the Gentiles' courtyard. Now there were actually inscriptions, because there were signs posted, inscribed into stone, all along here, warning if Gentiles not to enter into this area, and the penalty was death. The penalty was death. And we've actually found in 1835, and then in the early 1900s, they found a second one. They found two of these actual inscriptions from Jesus's time. Both were in Greek, saying, what does it say exactly? It's interesting. Oh, yeah. 1875 and 1935, and it says, no foreigner may enter within the barricade which surrounds the temple and enclosure. Anyone who is caught trespassing will bear personal responsibility for his ensuing death. So it was the death penalty for a foreigner to come into there. It was treated very seriously. The Romans respected this law. This was one of the few concessions they would make to the Jews. Because it was a religious matter. So the Romans supported the Jews. If a foreigner were to go in here, the Romans had no problem saying, you may execute the death penalty on them. And that's why also that the temple police, normally the Romans assumed all kind of military and police control. But they allowed the Jews, the Sanhedrin, to have a temple police of Jews in order to police this ground, because the Romans could not police it themselves. No Roman soldier would be allowed to go in here. So the Romans respected that. So, and this was a very serious charge, and they knew that it would get people outraged. So these Jews from Asia, probably, it may be that they're just trying to cause trouble for Paul, or it may be that they intensely dislike him. They are assuming the worst about him. They're assuming that he's totally thrown off any respect for the Jewish law. And so therefore, in his mind, he's taking these Gentiles, making them Christ followers, and thinking that they're Jews, and he would bring them even into the temple. And so they're saying that he brought Trophimus, he brought this Gentile from Ephesus into the temple, knowing that it would outrage the people. But from the way Luke words it, there's no, they supposed that he did this. They supposed Paul brought this foreigner in, but there's no evidence he actually did. They just assumed the worst about him to cause him trouble. 30, and all the city was disturbed, and the people ran together, seized Paul, and dragged him out of the temple, and immediately the doors were shut. All right, so we'll end with this, because there's been some interesting commentary about this. And immediately the doors were shut. Now, what's he mean here? So we go back to the picture of the temple. So you have here the beautiful gate. So it seems, and I know you can hardly see it, but there are steps. There are steps here out of the holy place into the priest's courtyard and the court of the Israelites where the men stood. And then there are steps here into the women's courtyard. And then there are steps to the beautiful gate too here. So it says that they dragged him out of the temple and immediately the doors were shut. So the temple police, in other words, get this alert that there's a claim that there's a Gentile inside the restricted area, which would mean all this area. So immediately they close the doors, they close the gates, they shut everyone out, and they drag Paul out down the steps. Some commentators have said that maybe in St. Luke's mind, that immediately the doors were shut has a kind of significance, meaning that this is kind of the point where, because we've seen all through up until this point, St. Luke has a great respect and veneration for the temple, but that maybe it's at this point that they consider that Jesus's warning and admonition about the temple kind of takes effect, because now they've kicked out God's prophet, God's messenger, Paul. And immediately the doors were shut kind of signifies this final slamming the door in the face of Christ and his messengers. And that from this point is when its destruction is kind of imminent now, which will take place maybe about 12 years later in 70. All right, so we'll end there. We'll pick up again around 31 next time and finish the rest of 21. All right, anybody have any questions?
I have a question, Father.
Yeah.
Back to the information about the curtains. Let me just make sure I understood correctly. There are two curtains, two separate ones. One at the very interior,
Right.
and then one the kind of yellow. I guess I don't know if that's the curtains or door there.
I don't think that's probably an accurate color.
Uh-huh.
representation of it.
So only the innermost curtain was torn, not both.
Yes,
that
correct. Yeah, yes. So yeah, usually what happens is people will interpret it, and I've even heard Orthodox say this incorrectly, that, and there is a kind of truth to it, that definitely when the curtain was torn, it represents, it can represent several things. Like, normally the tearing of the robes was a sign of mourning. And so the idea is that this is kind of, if God were to have a robe, it would be this inner veil, because his presence fills this Holy of Holies, right? And so this curtain would be kind of his clothing. And so that when it's rent, when it's ripped in the sign of mourning, when Jesus dies, that's the symbolism of when it says that the veil, the curtain was ripped, right? The sense of mourning. Some people have taken it as a sign of that there's the separation between man and God has ended. That I would say that's not really so much the Orthodox emphasis. Yes, this was ripped in order to perhaps to open up but
The mercy
the mercy seat would be in here.
mercy seat. Yeah, so we have access to the mercy seat, right, Father? I'm sorry, I interrupted.
No, it says, like, in Hebrews, for example, he talks about
St. Paul
Jesus.
talks about it.
Yeah, Jesus is the, I think we talked about the epistle reading a couple of weeks ago on my sermon, that Jesus goes into the Holy of Holies. He becomes our high priest forever according to the order of Melchizedek. He is God himself. In other words, in this area, he becomes both the high priest and God in this Holy of Holies. But it's kind of a false assumption to the Protestant reading is that this curtain was torn, and that now there's no, and it's kind of forgotten about that there were actually two curtains. They kind of forget that detail, that any kind of separation between God and man is done away with. But really, that's a very simplistic understanding of what happened. There's actually two curtains, and then you have another separation here. So separation, right? It's not just one. So yes, all Christians are now priests, including men and women are all priests and belong in this kind of inner court. There's no kind of second-class citizens, but there's still a special priesthood to minister to God. And they're the ones who serve here. And so this curtain, this separation, still exists. It's not really a separation in that we're separate from God, but it's maybe a distinction, or I don't know what the word is, but all Christians are here now.
I wonder, Father, then would it be correct to say, if we're explaining, if someone asked that question, say visiting our church, and then we have the iconostas there, I don't relate the two together myself, but when we've talked about the curtain before, I think perhaps to explain that the Messiah appeared and opened by the fulfillment of his sacrifice, the curtain separating God and man. He became the high priest available to all.
Yeah. I mean, the curtain meaning as a symbol of separation, but
or the holy places, and only the high priest is there, and he is the high priest.
Yeah, he is the high priest. And then we say that the bishop is in the place and in the type of Jesus as the high priest. And then by extension, the priest appointed by the bishop to lead each parish or congregation is by extension the place and the type of Christ himself as high priest. So you still have the high priest serving in here for the liturgy, but you have all of the people now in this area, in the priest's courtyard. So that's the movements, the breakdown and separations that have taken place. But a lot of times you'll hear, I've heard even many Orthodox say this, that there's no more really distinction between, and therefore this was particularly, I would say, popular, especially here in America. It was really pushed by the Protestants, and so I think some of the Orthodox in the middle of the last century really kind of bought into that and felt the criticism from the Protestants, and so there was a move to kind of open the iconostasis more, and that's where you'll see architecturally maybe where you'll see the design of more open
even the Cathedral at Atlanta. I think that's the way the iconostas is there at the Cathedral.
Yeah, it's all dating from that period where they're trying to respond to the criticisms from the Protestants. And then you'll see, like, if you look at the old pictures of our own cathedral from the 50s, the iconostasis had doors, solid wooden doors, and it had a curtain, which is the standard. But and the Orthodoxy never felt like, it's kind of assumed by the Protestants, there's ignorant Orthodox, for 2,000 years didn't read the Bible. And so therefore they ignorantly, continue to have doors and a curtain there. Well, no, that's not correct. We just understood there to be two different curtains, and that curtain still stays and the doors close with the curtain. But in the 20th century, I would say, especially in the West, there was this they felt the heat from the Protestant criticism, and instead of kind of explaining or even understanding themselves the distinction, they made moves to open it up more. So like in the cathedral, you can see that our cathedral, they did away with the curtain, and they took out the wooden doors and put in kind of a see-through glass doors instead, as a kind of compromise. Well, there's still doors, but they're glass, so you can see through.
I like that. I think it reveals to us what's occurring in the liturgy inside the holiest place at the church, and I think that's a good move. I don't think.
But there was, I thought, a liturgical reason why and when the curtain is closed and then opened. I see this in other communities. There was a time during the liturgy where they close the curtain, and when they open the curtain, and I thought it had to do with the liturgical process of the liturgy.
It does, yeah, and that's still observed almost everywhere in Orthodoxy, except for there's certain parts of the service where it's supposed to be open, where the people are supposed to see what's happening. There's certain parts where it's not supposed to be open, that people are not supposed to see. And this is the tradition of the church, except for here, except for in the 20th century in America and some of the Western churches, because, there was a modern tendency that, toward rationalization. As a product of the Enlightenment, there was this tendency toward rationalization, toward, I have to understand what's happening. And so there was this movement away from mystery. It was an anti-clericalism and anti-monasticism, all part of the same Enlightenment Protestant kind of push. I think now you're seeing, as we're entering late modernity, maybe arguably post-modernity, you see a lot of the younger people are they're so tired of this kind of rationalistic approach to religion, and they're really trying to reclaim mystery. So you even see Protestant churches moving a little bit more
Towards the mystical.
history, more ritual, more symbol.
Think of it more as a greater understanding and a greater information about our faith and the liturgical, the ritual of the liturgy and what occurs. And I think it brings the community more in bond with the actions of the clergy. And yet our iconostas still offers the separation between the role of the clergy and the bishop representing God's assignment to their lives, as they are called.
I think it's an accommodation too. I think it was appropriate for a certain time, for sure. I mean, especially when you're dealing with people influenced by, in Greece never really experienced the Enlightenment in the same way that happened in the rest of the Western world. And so in Greece, even to this day, you still have, you're really dealing as a priest within your parish with three different, totally different mentalities. You still have this pre-modern mentality of a modern mentality, you have a postmodern mentality, arguably. The pre-modern mentality is in the older generation, which is, more of an agrarian mindset, the traditional old world mindset. And there you can see very clearly a totally different attitude and understanding of society, of religion. In that mentality, what's important to that generation in Greece is when the church comes together for Sunday or for a feast day, the important thing is that everyone be present. Right? That's the important thing. Everyone needs to be present. The mayor needs to be present, and he needs to sit in the special seat up front, which is a seat for the mayor. The police chief needs to be there, and he needs to be in his uniform. If it's a big feast day, he needs to be in his police chief uniform. The fire chief, the head military officer, whatever dignitaries. Why? Because they symbolize the fullness of the community all being present. And there's really no emphasis on participation, personal individual participation. What's important is presence of the community. Then you have the modern mentality is influenced by the Enlightenment. There you have the emphasis really is on individual participation, individual understanding and participation in the service. And then you have the postmodern, which is, it's in Greece, you don't really have it so much, but you do start to see it in the younger generation, this postmodern, which is, more interested in, rather than knowledge, they're interested in experience, right? How do I understand God in my heart? How do I feel God in my heart? Not just understand him, but how do I experience him, right? Which is almost circling back to more of a pre-modern. Now here in America, though, we don't have the pre-modern mentality, almost arguably never existed in America since its founding, because we were founded on modernist principles. So in America, the majority is a modern view, and now arguably in the last few years, a postmodern view. So in my view, what's happening is, so a lot of the American churches in particular really dominated, never had this kind of balance of the older generation offering this pre-modern emphasis. So in American churches, we have this huge emphasis on individual participation, like congregational singing is very important, etc., and understanding, following along in the books, which you won't necessarily see in Greece. And I don't think there's anything wrong with it per se, but my big emphasis that I keep trying to hammer on is that was good for then, right? So in the 20th century, in the 1900s, that was what the people needed, because that's where they were. That was what the culture was this modern emphasis on rational understanding, participation, right? The question now is, so I'm not criticizing what happened in the past. The question is now, what do the people need, right? If we just insist on, well, that was the tradition, you know, that's the tradition that's been here for 70 years or 80 years or whatever, and that's how we have to keep it no matter what, and over my dead body, we're going to change it, then we're denying the very thing that allowed it to adapt last century, you know?